Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Eddie Akiva. Greeting listeners from the void. This is the BGBC, the Backlog Broadcasting Company, and we're about to get ready to start with the Best of the Rest bonus cast. Would you give me one moment here? All right, let's get started. Apologies. All right, should be good here. Greetings, viewers, and listeners from the void. My name is Eddie Akiba, and you are listening to the Impostor Syndrome Podcast bonus podcast, the Best of the Rest cast. The extra podcast I put out every month that features my thoughts on the rest of the games that I've been playing on Twitch and YouTube. It's part of the Backlog Gaming Broadcast Company, aka the BGBC. If you are just joining us for the first time, each month I play a different one of my favorite games of all time and talk about it on my monthly podcast called the Impostor Syndrome Podcast, aka the Impostor Syndrome Podcast, Best Games or Best Cast, aka the BGBC on the BGBC. I also host weekly live streams on Twitch and YouTube during which I not only play the game of the month, but at least one retro game, one game from my never-ending backlog, and at least one RPG. Be sure to stick around to the end of the episode for the new programming guide starting in March on the BGBC, because I figured what better way to instill confidence in my listeners and grow my channel than to announce a streaming schedule, my first podcast, only to immediately change it 2 weeks later after realizing a few tweaks were in order. Now, I do apologize to my listeners, which include my cat and 2 dogs. Please be patient. This is a learning process for me, and I've only just dipped my feet into the podcasting water. So much like professional wrestling, the card is subject to change, and I may continue to fiddle with things and make tweaks to the schedule in time until I find something that feels just right, because the last thing I want this endeavor to feel like is work, because we're all about fun on the BGBC. So let's get to the fun parts as we begin this inaugural Best of the Rest bonus cast episode. And remember, kids, you can't spell fun without F-U. Now, the game of the month on the BGC in February was Magic's 1982 game Atlantis for the Atari 2600, which was the subject of the first episode of the Impostor Syndrome Podcast. Now, normally, and going forward, I'll only be playing one new game from my backlog each month. But this month, I played no less than 3 games from my backlog because I'm insane, apparently. The first game that I finished from my backlog on stream this month was Road 96, which I'd been playing and was nearly finished with when I officially launched the podcast. If you're unfamiliar... let's see here. If you're unfamiliar with Road 96, it's an indie roguelite first-person adventure game developed by Digix Art and first released in 2021. It's available on all major platforms. I would describe Road 96 as a cross between a hitchhiking simulator, walking simulator, and choose-your-own-adventure political drama. You play as a number of nameless, faceless hitchhikers, hitchhiking teenagers who are trying to flee an authoritarian regime in the fictional country of Petria. The start of each run, if you can describe it like that, is generated randomly, although you do encounter recurring named characters whose stories are gradually revealed to the player piece by piece during each successful run for the border. The official Steam description reads as follows: Summer 1996. Today is the day. You hit the road. Adventure, freedom, escape, run, flee the regime, try to survive. On this risky road trip to the border, you'll meet incredible characters and discover their intertwined stories and secrets in an ever-evolving adventure. But every mile opens up a choice to make. Your decisions will change your adventure, change the people you meet, maybe even change the world. Basically, at the start of each run, you're given the choice to start as a number of, like I said, randomly generated hitchhikers. Each starts with a different amount of money, health, and start their journey at different distances from the border, which you're trying to escape to. Now, each run is fairly short. They last between about 30 minutes to an hour. And it'll take you less than 10 hours to roll credits in the game, but you won't end up seeing all of the main named story character arcs all the way through in a single start to credits playthrough. I think by the time I finished the game, I think I saw 2 main story characters, like stories all the way through, of which there's 8 main story characters. And I saw a majority of the remaining characters. I said most of them probably I got up to like over 50 to 75% through. As you're playing the game, after each story bit with like one of these NPC characters, it transitioning in between scenes, it will tell you like the percentage of the story of those characters that you've unlocked. Now you can keep playing after the credits roll in a new game plus of sorts that will let you see the rest of the character stories, which is pretty cool. Gives the game some replay value. You traverse the world in various different ways. You can walk, you can hitchhike, you can ride the bus, you can take a taxi, you can even steal a car. There are multiple points during the course of the game where you'll need to make important story choices that can affect the outcome of your run, which either end, ones I saw, mainly, I think ones where you would successfully get across the border. There was one where I got arrested. There was one where I got killed. One of the choices I made ended up with one of my characters dying. So there are different ways that those runs can end. Now, again, the story, it's set in in 1996. It's fictional, but it's kind of like real world, but like everything is fake. So it's a fictional setting. So the year is 1996. The authoritarian nation of Petria prepares for a presidential election between new candidates Flores, who vaguely promises change to the nation, and Petria's long-standing dictator Tyrak, whose win could spell doom for the country. 10 years earlier, in 1986, a landslide caused by an explosion on a mountain pass killed many civilians during a televised event. The government blamed the terrorist group known as the Black Brigades for the fatalities, included that the bombing was an attempt to assassinate Tyrak. Now, Tyrak, of course, he's an authoritarian type of kind of dictator, and he manipulates state media to portray dissenters as terrorists. He controls the security forces. Sounds familiar. Teenagers who oppose his policies are secretly arrested and sent to labor camps, prompting many young Petrian citizens to attempt to flee by crossing the northern border. Now, while Road 96 wasn't supposed to be my official backlog game of the month in February, that honor went to Ace Combat 7 Skies Unknown. What happened was I was just about 2 runs away from finishing the game before I officially launched the podcast in February. So I figured, why not just cross it off my backlog? Because I was having a really good time with that game. A game like Road 96, it's one of the reasons I started this podcast, because I really want to explore different types of games outside of my normal wheelhouse. The games that are different from your typical AAA tentpole blockbuster. Road 96, it certainly fits that bill. It's one of the games that actually moved me in the month of February with its story. The near contemporary setting is disturbingly familiar if you're paying attention to anything that's been happening in the news lately, stuff that's happening in the U.S. I'm not going to delve too deep into the story, but there were moments that stood out to me that were particularly moving. One involved a character's death, and another involved some environmental storytelling during a puzzle, which you discover a hideout and some personal items and belongings belonging to another pair of hitchhikers that are trying to make their way to the border. It was a married couple. At one point, you find a scrapbook, and you have to match a photo in this hideout with the different excerpts from this kind of almost like journal / scrapbook. And so I remember one of the pictures was one of the first entries was describing this couple's first fight, and it was something completely trivial, like I think they had gotten like an argument over like food, like not being able to get like the food that they wanted at some place they had stopped for lunch or something. So something like completely trivial. Uh, and I can remember audibly saying something like, "Oh, this must be like a new couple." If that's like, the big argument that they're jotting down in their journal. Um, and later on, as you fast forward to a story vignette where you discover after you like fill in the this scrapbook, you learn that it talks about how the person proposed to the woman, and he talks about how he proposed to her like under this tree, and so you're after you complete the puzzle, you walk out of this hideout, and there's this beautiful like setting sun that's casting this like orange glow over, of course, the whole game world. And in the corner, you see this tree, and in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, they set us up with this environmental storytelling where they're telling you about this newlywed couple, and in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, they're dead, right? They've died somewhere along the journey, and like this is going to be the emotional gut punch the game is going to throw at you. And of course, you see the tree, and as you get closer to the tree, like this shadowy like silhouette of the couple like forms, and you can see the guy on his knees, right? So I'm thinking, yeah, this is where the game's going to get me. This is where the game's going to make me cry. And so I get to the tree, and what you find is to complete the puzzle, you put I wanted to bring this scrapbook with me across the border, but the game, in order to progress the game, you had to put it at the base of the tree. And then after you do that, you realize that they had buried something in front of the tree, and what it was you discovered the couple's wedding rings buried beneath the tree, and you learn he didn't die. Basically, what happens? They parted ways. They went their separate ways on their journey to attempt escape across the border. The way that they separated, it's not described as some big like dramatic thing or event that resulted in the separation. Rather, the way the game like describes it, they kind of just like grew apart, along this journey. And it's that little story segment that kind of elevated the game for me, and also left me honestly like teary eyed. Like if you watch the stream, I get a little teary eyed there because it's written in a very non-video gamey way in a sense. It's kind of like mature, well-written take on a relationship that has ended, and yeah, I was surprised by that. I really enjoyed that. That's one of the things I'm looking for in the games I played today. Don't get me wrong, I like your big AAA tentpole games. Resident Evil 9 just came out here and it's getting like rave reviews, and I can't wait to play that game. But as I'm older, like I'm looking for stuff that kind of like resonates with me emotionally, or something that like I can relate to some degree, that moves me in a way, So with Road 96, I would say the plot itself is very interesting, and the main named story characters are each well developed, and the stories kept me wanting to play until the end. You have different like characters. You have like a trucker who's like, you find out is part of like one of this like rebel groups or whatever. There's another guy who he's like a cabbie, and he's like seeking revenge against the rebels because like his daughter like died during that explosion in the 80s that the game references. There's also the great music throughout the game. The licensed soundtrack is fantastic. It's almost worth buying the game just to experience the music in the game. And throughout the game, you collect like various cassette tapes featuring the myriad of songs and artists that are featured on the game soundtrack, which I thought was pretty cool. My only real gripe with the game is besides being not a huge fan of roguelites, it's that the moment-to-moment gameplay left me wanting something with just a little bit more meat on the bone, if you will. What I mean by that is what I mean by that is that it's billed as an adventure game, but the puzzles themselves aren't ever really that challenging per se. It feels more like a story-driven walking simulator with branching paths and multiple dialogue options, with some light adventure game puzzles. It doesn't really feel like a fully fledged adventure game first and foremost, which is okay. I'm personally a fan of short story-driven walking simulator adventure type games. I describe it as kind of like if you've ever played like a telltale adventure game, kind of like that, where we have like the story, like the dialogue options, where you have different choices you can make, and the characters will quote remember that. So that's what it's kind of like, but with even more light puzzle elements than say your standard Telltale game. Like you're not going to get stumped really on any of these puzzles. There was one that kind of stumped me involving like dates, like a calendar and stuff like that, but that's just because I'm dumb. Now, like I said, you'll get like the telltale style story decisions that you have to make throughout the game. One route is kind of like, hey, I just want to get to the border, doing the least harm possible, kind of Paragon playthrough. The other story dialogue options you can take, one's more like kind of like a militant revolutionary route, or you can take like kind of like a more like politically moderate route through the game as well, kind of like we can vote our way out of this type thing. So it's a really cool concept with some great writing, great music, and it's a relatively short game. So definitely worth checking out in my opinion, and I'm glad I finished it. Like especially if you don't have a lot of time to game. Like I said, these runs, it's rarely going to take you more than an hour. A lot of these are taking like a half an hour. So yeah, if you're looking for something different, something kind of light and breezy to get. Well, not theme wise, it's not light, but gameplay light to get through. It's a good game. Now moving on, I spent a lot of time talking about Road 96. Now let me talk about the actual game that the main backlog game that I was playing this month, and that was Ace Combat 7: Skies Unknown. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Ace Combat franchise, it's been around since the PlayStation 1 days, and it's an arcade flight simulator with heavy emphasis on arcade there. This is not Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is fine, because I much more enjoy arcade flight combat games, which I've not played one of these in several years. Ace Combat 7 was developed by Bandai Namco Studios and published by Bandai Namco Entertainment. It was released in 2019. I'm playing the PlayStation version. It's available on all major platforms, I believe. I actually picked up this game back when it launched in 2019 because I had a PSVR for the PS4 back then. I still do. The game had a bonus VR mode feature for featuring a handful of VR missions. So I ended up playing the VR missions back when I first got it, but I never got around to playing the main campaign, which is comprised of about 20 or so missions. Now, at the time I was writing this, I was a little over halfway through the game. By the end of the month, I got to mission 12. Out of all the games that I played this month, besides 2018's indie platformer Gris, Ace Combat 7 was the most purely like gameplay mechanic focused of the bunch. If you want a video game and you like flight combat games, Ace Combat might be up your alley. One of the main reasons why I picked up Ace Combat 7 originally, besides the VR mode that I mentioned earlier, is because the story got high praise, and I love video games as a storytelling medium. Most of these military-themed games have a paper-thin story with two-dimensional characters, but I'd compare Ace Combat to kind of like, anime, if that makes any sense. Imagine kind of like Macross or Gundam, but set in the real world with real fighter jets instead of giant robots. Now, having said that, the story starts with an interesting opening premise and a very kind of compelling, main character. The story itself, and again, I'm about halfway through before I dropped it, only just started really to bloom into something interesting, in my opinion, 5, 6, 7 missions in. While the first few missions are mechanically sound, those first half dozen or so missions feel a little shallow mechanics-wise, and the story just wasn't grabbing me. There was a particular mission, I believe, where you have to score a certain number of kills or points to progress, that for some reason was just kicking my ass throughout that game. And normally, I think I would just put this back on the shelf because I was struggling to have fun beyond just the core mechanics that are introduced in those opening missions. But once I got past mission 5, the game and story started to pick up. In between each mission, you get a little narrator driving story cutscene that push the plot forward. But for me, one of my biggest gripes with these styles of games that a lot of the story is presented through radio chatter between the various pilots that make up your squadron. Now, for me, maybe because I'm older now, but it's having an extremely difficult time keeping track of which character was which, because they all have that typical Top Gun-esque call sign names. Because when I'm in a heat of action, like if I'm in the middle of a dogfight, a tense, dogfight trying to evade another fighter jet or attempting to evade a surface-to-air missile, or like if I'm in a difficult bombing run, my focus is on the action and not the half or so dozen or so disembodied voices that are all vaguely sound familiar, that are delivering the story through staticky radio conversations between them. So it's kind of hard to keep track of the story. At the beginning of each mission, you're treated to a mission briefing with a bunch of proper names that are hard to keep track of and somewhat long-winded explanations of your mission objectives. It definitely fits the mood of the game, but for a lot of these mission briefings, I was kind of like left twiddling my thumbs until the action started, if I'm being honest. And because I have the memory of a goldfish now, I had a hard time, like I said, following it. So I'm kind of like going to give you like a brief synopsis of the plot from a macro level based on this description from Wikipedia. Again, highly professional podcast here. Ace Combat 7 is set in a series' fictional universe of strange real, where Earth has entirely different nations, geography, and history. The game's story details the 2019 Lighthouse War fought between the Ocean Federation and the Kingdom of Eurasia. Following the Continental War, Oceania brokered a peace treaty between the Federal Republic of Eurasia and the rest of the Eurasian continent, while the International Union formed a peacekeeping force for the continent. In 2011, Eurasia restored its monarchy, ruled by the Delis royal family, while former Ocean President Vincent Harling ordered the construction of the International Space Elevator. Space elevator and communications tower used to convert atmospheric energy into energy off the coast of Western Eurasia. Though Harling framed the International Space Elevator as promoting lasting peace, Eurasia perceived it as a symbol of ocean imperialism and infringed on Eurasian sovereignty, with these resentments ultimately sparking the Lighthouse War. So yeah, lots of proper names, lots of stuff to keep track of. Players control an ocean fighter pilot named Trigger. The game's story, God, I can't talk, is told from the point of view of three characters: Avril Mead, an ocean aircraft mechanic and penal laborer sent to work for Spare Squadron, an ocean penal military unit; Rosa Cosette Delis, the princess and heir of the Eurasian throne; and Dr. Schroeder, a Belkin scientist developing advanced combat drone technology for the Eurasian military. Now, if all that seems confusing and hard to follow, I know I've said that multiple times. It kind of is. The story's focused on this squadron is basically made up of prisoners. So there's this interesting aspect of these characters being forced to fly these missions, and they're basically treated like fodder by the people issuing the orders. The other most interesting character is this enemy pilot that they're using all his combat flight data from to develop these attack drones. He's kind of this old, grizzled fighter pilot. And it's just a cool concept that they're basing all this combat flights data for these drones based on the capabilities of this one badass dude. Because like throughout the missions, you'll encounter these like drones, these attack drones that are highly like maneuverable and all that stuff. So, but they're all based on this famous fighter pilot that fights for the enemies. And so that's where you can kind of get that like 90s anime vibe from, you know. There's definitely like a pinch, like just a small pinch of Metal Gear Solid, mind you, when you're talking about these characters. Now, when you complete each mission, you earn money to buy new planes, and you can unlock various special weapons and equipment that makes the things interesting. That element has been a part of the franchise as far back as I can remember. There's also some new cool mechanics they've introduced. For example, the game features hyper-photorealistic clouds that will throw off enemy missiles targeting you. They'll also ice up your wings. There was another mission I played during a thunderstorm, during which if your jet got struck by lightning, it would mess with your instruments and displays, which is cool. There was another mission involving a big sandstorm where in order to find your targets, you had to fly super close to the ground because the sandstorm scrambled your enemy radar. So all in all, the game does feature some cool new mechanics and elements, such as the unlockable fighter jets, which I believe the base game has close to about 30. That's actually has been part of the franchise for a while, but the environmental mechanics are new. That being said, a lot of the core mechanics are kind of the same kind of flight combat mechanics that have been central to the franchise, his identity since its inception. So it does feel really familiar. Don't get me wrong, it's plenty entertaining if you just want to shut your brain off and have some cool dogfights. You can't go wrong here. It's just there's not a whole lot of mechanical depth to the game. There's only so many Ace Combat games you can play before the mechanics just kind of feel like kind of samey. Like it was fun to go back and play this style of game because I've not played an Ace Combat game in a hot minute, probably since like the PS2 days. But it's one of those kind of games where after the first few missions, you kind of feel like you've experienced most of what the game is going to offer already. And stretching that out over 20 missions that range in length from 30 minutes to an hour, it kind of starts to feel like a slog a little bit. And the fact the story is kind of hard to follow meant I was really pushing myself to keep playing after those first few introductory missions. It's by no means a bad game. In fact, you'll see it has very positive word of mouth and glowing reviews. It's just for, I'm about halfway through, and it took about getting about halfway through for it to get the hooks in me. It's hooks into me, so take that as you will. And honestly, I kind of rage quit this game because I got to mission 12 and I think I'm done. Because it was one of these missions where you have to protect this base where for a set amount of time so it can shoot off some special weapon or something, but you have to protect it from ground units and also aerial bombers from the enemy. Now, each mission, your jet can carry standard missiles and then one special weapon. So, for example, your special weapon could be homing missiles that home onto half a dozen enemy planes, or you could have something that locks onto half a dozen ground targets. So, if you're in a mission where you're trying to protect a base from being destroyed, and you have ground and air units, you kind of have to make a choice. Okay, who am I going to focus on, ground or air? So I banged my head against the wall for 2 streams, 4 hours. And it turns out one of the main reasons why I couldn't beat it is because I just hadn't unlocked enough jets yet. And mind you, I played up to mission 12. Granted, I probably made some stupid purchases. Probably should have stuck to one section of the aircraft unlock tree. So I thought, okay, I'll just grind some, because you can play replay missions and get the points you need to unlock stuff, money. So I did that, but just the amount of money I was getting from the missions, to unlock one of the planes that supposedly that I looked up that you could use to actually have a chance of beating that mission, it would have taken me another 2 to 3 hours of grinding these other missions just to unlock one of those. And so, yeah, I called it. As I've gotten older, one thing I've learned as I've gotten older, that's okay to let things go. And, it's just after replaying that mission so many times, I just, decided I'm done, and that's okay. And I'm going to commit Ace Combat to the backlog funeral pyre. May you rest in peace in gaming Valhalla, Ace Combat 7. I'm sure there are plenty of people that love you. And there are. I'm sorry that it's not you, it's me. Anyway, that being said, there is another game from my backlog that I played this month that I did finish, and I did really enjoy greatly, and that was the indie platformer Gris. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's a game by Spanish developer Nomada Studio. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And published by Devolver Digital, that first released back in 2018. Their most recent game was called Neva, I believe. That got good reviews. And I'll just say this. Gris is like playing Super Mario Brothers. If Super Mario Brothers was in some fine arts museum or something, it's literally like playing a painting. The hand-drawn, like line art style animation and backgrounds are absolutely stunning. It almost has kind of like a Mobius kind of feel to it. Mobius, of course, is the famous French comic artist who influenced a lot of science fiction and fantasy art in the 70s and 80s. Now, Nomada Studio was formed by two Ubisoft employees, actually, and an artist named Conrad Rosette, I believe. Now, apparently the theme of the game is the 5 stages of grief, with Gris being the Spanish word for gray. I learned that. I guess the changing environments from darker ones to more vibrant, lively, and floral ones as you unlock more abilities is meant to represent those 5 stages of grief. Now, I consider myself somewhat intelligent, but also I am quite dumb. So for me, the average person in my shoes, you're not getting hit over the head the whole game that, oh, this game is about grief. Like, you're not going to get that. It's not going to hit you over the head with that. It's very metaphorical with its imagery. And on the surface, it's just an absolutely gorgeous platformer. The character you play unlocks various powers related to her dress throughout the game. And at one point near the end, you unlock the power to sing, which makes flowers bloom, etc. So yeah, think like Super Mario Brothers 2, how all the characters had unique abilities. Now imagine if a singular character had those abilities, but you unlock them throughout the course of the game. Now there's not a lot. I believe there's 4 main abilities. There's one that like you can turn into like a heavy block, where you can smash the ground with. There's one where you can like swim underwater like a stingray. There's the one where you're singing, and there's another one I believe where you can kind of like float in the air, like Princess Peach in was it Peach in Super Mario Brothers 2? So that's what Gris feels like. The music's also great. It's just kind of that lo-fi trance-like music that really kind of has chill vibes almost at the point where, because I'm an old man now, I found myself getting slightly sleepy, almost like if you ever had like CBD or something like that, like those sleep aids, in a good way. Like it was very trance-like, very meditative. Like I'm into meditation, and like it's very just a chill game that you can kind of zone out to and feel really good playing. Gris, and it's definitely worth playing. It's like I said, it's basically like Super Mario Brothers on CBD, and it's only a few hours. There are puzzles. I did get stumped a few times, but mostly because I was overthinking things. I guess maybe the one downside I think was that yes, it's a puzzle platformer, but the puzzles themselves are very light. Now, there are a few, like I said, that will stump you if you're dumb like me. But for the most part, you can just breeze through the game, which is fine, because I need games like that. I need games where I can kind of just zone out, look at some stunning character art or animation, just listen to like a bomb-ass soundtrack, and just kind of turn your brain off, escape from reality for a little bit. If you had a stressful day at work, that kind of game, try playing Gris. It's a homeopathic cure for stress. Just don't expect a particularly difficult challenge, which again, it's okay. Let's see here. Because the main character, she's great. She's this breezy, light line drawing of a woman who just kind of floats through the air, much like you just glide with relative ease through Gris's breathtaking world. And it's usually on sale, at least on consoles, which explains why it sold like something like 3 million copies. I think I picked it up for like $2 on one of the recent PSN sales. So yeah, so far this month, the two indie games that I played, Road 96 and Gris, those have been my two favorite games from the backlog that I played, that I knocked out. Now, like I said, I also play retro games on my channel. The retro game I played this month, I'm trying to keep them thematically related to the game of the month. So since the game of the month was Atlantis for the Atari 2600, the retro game I played this month was the classic LucasArts point-and-click adventure game Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. Which is a game that has reminded me why I love point-and-click adventure games, but also some of the things that really, really annoy me about some early 90s point-and-click adventure games. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is a beloved point-and-click adventure game developed and published by LucasArts. It was first released in June of 1992. Apparently, it was the seventh game to use the Scum engine, which, if you're familiar with adventure games of that era, you'll know what the Scum engine is. It's kind of like a player-controlled, language, like verbiage, programming language. Kind of manifests itself in various actions or verbs that you can use to interact with the environment, like push, pull, look, that kind of thing. It's very famous in the history of point-and-click adventure games. When you think about 90s point-and-click adventure games, you'll think of stuff like Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle, and those games kind of really helped pioneer the point-and-click adventure genre during that time. SCUM actually stands for, and I looked this up, Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion, which was first implemented in the 1987's Maniac Mansions. That's where it gets its name from. So Indiana Jones is kind of unique when it comes to point-and-click adventure games because it features 3 different paths you can take based on your gameplay style. Basically, at the end of the first act, there's a branching path option where you decide how you want to play the rest of the game. There's a fists path that focuses more on combat. There's a wits path that kind of is like a solo puzzle-heavy path. And then there's the path that I took, which is the team path, in which you team up with fellow archaeologist turned spiritualist and psychic Sophia Hapgood. Plot is centered on Indiana Jones' search for the legendary sunken city of Atlantis. Hapgood tags along for the journey, and the duo are pursued by the evil Nazis. You are seeking the secrets and powers of Atlantis that serve to further their desires for world conquest. Now, while I am a fan of point-and-click adventure games, I didn't play Fate of Atlantis for the first time until 2009, when Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings released on the Nintendo Wii, which was kind of an okay game, but largely forgettable. It was a largely forgettable action game on the Wii. The Fate of Atlantis was an unlockable in that game, and people often joked at the time that basically Staff of Kings was the bonus game that you got with Fate of Atlantis if you bought that game for the Wii. I personally really enjoy point-and-click adventure games, even though I get stumped very easily. Positives I'll say about Fate of Atlantis is that it does really capture that feeling of a world-spanning classic indie adventure. At the time when this game came out, really other than RPGs, point-and-click adventure games were really the only other game genre with a heavy emphasis and focus on story. And I've always very much enjoyed story-driven, narrative-based games. Nowadays, every game has a story, at least non-multiplayer games. But back then, again, if you didn't want just some throwaway story, if you didn't want an arcade action game, where you went for story was RPGs and point-and-click adventure games. And a lot of times, point-and-click adventure games were at the apex or of game graphics and technical expertise. You saw a lot of the great art and graphics in games in point-and-click adventure games. Now, in Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, there is a very good variety of locations in the game. You get to go to places like Iceland, Algiers, Barnett College, which is the university where Indy teaches, archaeology. Then there's the Azores. Shout out to the Azores. That's where my ancestors are from. And where I visited before, it's literally the most beautiful place on earth. So, obrigado to any Portuguese listeners out there. And then, of course, there is the fabled city of Atlantis itself, among other locations in the game. Throughout the game, you'll investigate. Throughout the game, you investigate a handful of archaeological sites in true indie fashion. And for the longest time, Fate of Atlantis was considered the quintessential representation of the Indiana Jones universe in video games. Today, that's probably would go to the most recent Indiana Jones game that came out just here recently, which was the Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which I did beat and finish. And yeah, if you're looking for the modern AAA Indiana Jones experience, definitely check out Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. It's a good game. I enjoyed it. But anyway, getting back to Fate of the Atlantis. I'll say that some elements in the game have not aged well. There's, of course, the typical nonsensical puzzle solutions you'll occasionally come across, which is pretty much standard for this genre of game from that time period. Some of the writing, particularly the interactions between Indy and Sophia, that have not aged particularly well. Indy's less kind of like quippy and charming and almost, I don't want to say chauvinist. Definitely not chauvinist, but there are a few times where I was like, oof, that's would not go over well today. Also, while most of the game is pretty varied and interesting, actual Atlantis is probably one of the most frustrating endgame areas in an adventure game that I played. For a lot of the game, the items in your inventory are single use, but it seems like once you got to Atlantis, there were several items where you ended up reusing them multiple times, which meant backtracking. You had items where, like, limited use items. Oh my god, there's so much backtracking in the final section of that game. Particularly this huge maze that isn't too difficult to navigate, but the fact that there's not a run button or ability to make Indy walk any faster made this section a slog, because you also end up getting in constant fistfights with Nazis patrolling the area, and the fistfight combat, it's not difficult at all. It's just repetitive and frustrating. There's a section with this floating crab that moves so slow, and you have to backtrack so often. Then the last portion of the game, I really walked out of it kind of frustrating, just ready for the game to be over with. And there was two other sections of the game. One like involving vehicles. One involves a hot air balloon, and another involves a sub piloting a submarine. And oh my god, those were probably two of the most frustrating things I've encountered recently in any point-and-click adventure game that I've played. I know Fate of Atlantis is kind of like a golden cow to a lot of point-and-click adventure game fans, but just in a modern sense, there are portions of it that have not aged great. So, which is kind of the opposite of the Monkey Island games, which for me are timeless and still a joy to play. Again, don't get me wrong, Fate of Atlantis is considered a classic in the point-and-click adventure genre, but like I said, it's starting to show its age. I'd say like I said, I think Indiana Jones, for modern standards, The Great Circle is the closest thing you're going to get to an interactive Indiana Jones film, with the caveat that it suffers a lot of the padding and bloat of some modern open-world-ish AAA games, in the sense that they're fun, but I have OCD, so I ended up getting burned out on all the optional side content and side quests like those that were present in The Great Circle. Now, the last game I played this month was Chrono Trigger on the Saturday Morning RPG Show, um, which I had originally, because I'm reworking my schedule, I had originally was just going to move the Saturday Morning RPG Show to Monday nights and call it The Grind. But I think I'm keeping the Saturday Morning RPG Show, but I'm adding an extra streaming night of RPGs. So if you're an RPG fan and you're following the channel, we're still going to do the Saturday Morning RPG Show. I'm going to start it a little later than normal. I had been starting it at 10 a.m. on Saturday mornings, but I'm going to start it at 11, and then at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturdays. Again, that's a Saturday Morning RPG Show. And then on Monday, starting this month, which is March, so starting the day after this podcast airs or records, I am going to start streaming Monday nights RPGs on a show that I'm calling The Grind. Because I'm a huge RPG fan, and I have so many RPGs in my backlog that I need to finish, so I need at least 2 nights a week where I'm playing RPGs. And one, even though I'm a huge RPG fan, one of my backlog games of shame has been Chrono Trigger, because it's widely considered one of the best, if not the best, RPGs of all time. The game's development team was dubbed by the game's developer Square. Today it's known as Square Enix as the Dream Team. It featured, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of these people's names, even though I know how to say them. When I try to say them, my words turn into mush, so I apologize. So it featured Hinorobu Sakaguchi, or also known as the Gooch, creator of the Final Fantasy series, Yuji Horii, creator of Enix's Dragon Quest, and Akira, the late great Akira Toriyama, character designer for Dragon Quest and the man behind the world-famous Dragon Ball anime and manga. Part of the reason I never played Chrono Trigger back when it first came out is because I was a Sega kid growing up. More so because as kids we couldn't really afford more than one main game console. So it was a combination of stupid Sega console fanboyism and just the fact I could never afford a SNES growing up is the reason I didn't really play it at launch. Now get me wrong, we had an NES growing up, but after the NES Nintendo, my 16-bit of console of choice was the Sega Genesis. Also, Chrono Trigger came out in 1995, which is the same year the PlayStation 1 released. So for me, as someone who also had a Sega CD and already kind of knew about CD-ROM technology at the time, what it could bring to video games, I was pretty much done with the 16-bit generation of consoles by the time Chrono Trigger came out. Now, I'm going to save my final thoughts for Chrono Trigger when I finally finish Chrono Trigger. So tune in to more episodes of the Best of the Rest cast to hear my final thoughts of it once I do finish it. I'm hoping to finish it by the end of March. I know it has multiple endings. I know it's not very particularly long when it comes to RPGs. Now, I will say from what I've played so far, I was quite blown away by how story-heavy the beginning parts of the game are and just how briskly the pace moves in the game. Even though it's a game from 1995, it feels quite modern still, which was surprising, especially compared to peers in the console RPG genre from the 16-bit era of the time. Going back and playing this, you can feel that Square magic really solidifying in Chrono Trigger, which would help usher in what many consider to be the original golden age of console RPGs in the West, with the rise of the PlayStation and massive hits like Final Fantasy VII. Like I said, I was really surprised by the brisk pacing of the game. It very does much feel like a modern game when it comes to pacing. They're also talking about remaking it, so look forward to that here soon. Hopefully they announce that soon. The game is turn-based, but it's an active time battle system, and the combat system is quite fun. You can do various combo attacks. Like if you've ever played Phantasy Star 4, where you have like combination magic attacks, you can do that in Chrono Trigger. The graphics are really stupendous for the Super Nintendo, and really the game really hasn't been challenging at all. I think I died to a boss or two a few times, but otherwise, it really does have the pacing of a modern RPG. So I'm really excited to continue to play that on stream. Um, Speaking to which, like I alluded to earlier, I am switching my schedule around because, as always, I have huge ambitions of grandeur when I start a project, but then reality, when it plays out, is turns out it's not as realistic as I had hoped. Um, I've been basically running like two separate streams on Saturdays and Sundays, and then I realized that was kind of untenable because my entire weekend was basically spent in prep and on stream. And the last thing I want this whole endeavor to feel like is work, because the whole point of this thing is to have fun and not stress out, which I've been doing a bunch of, and also been neglecting my own self-care, which isn't good. Especially considering I had a heart-related health scare late last year. So basically, I'm going to be keeping the same content, but I'm just spreading it out over more days. Again, I'm still tinkering with things, so March's schedule may not end up being the final set in stone schedule for the BGBC. But I feel like I'm moving in the right direction, and honestly, I tested it out this weekend, and I think I'm comfy with where I'm at. So Retro Replay Thursdays, they will still be on Thursdays. That's the Retro Replay Thursday, which is the night of the week I play a retro game on stream. I'm going to move that to 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Thursday nights, so I'm not scrambling after work to get ready for stream. Also, it's going to give me a chance. I'm a big wrestling fan, so I'll have a chance to watch Ring of Honor. And of course, I don't want to counter-program Ring of Honor. But anyway, so Thursday nights, Retro Replay Thursday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Free Play Fridays. Okay, that's going to stay the same, but I'm going to start it at 6:30 p.m. instead of 6 p.m. Eastern. Again, just so I'm not scrambling right after work to get ready for stream. On Saturdays, we're keeping the Saturday morning RPG show. We're just going to start at an hour later. Instead of 10 a.m. Eastern, we're going to start at 11 a.m. Eastern. I'm going to try to keep it to about an hour and a half stream on Saturdays. And then that way I can play some more on Monday nights, and my whole Saturday isn't on stream. Also on Saturday, so the second RPG stream night is going to be Mondays at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to call that stream The Grind. So again, if you like RPGs, Saturday morning RPG show 11 a.m. and on Saturdays, and then The Grind at 8:30 p.m. on Mondays. Also on Saturdays, there is the Saturday afternoon main event, which is the stream that let me back up, because Free Play Fridays, what that is that's dealer's choice. That's where on Fridays I'm going to play a game of my choosing. Again, that starts at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Mainly, I'm going to focus on alternating between the game of the month that I'm covering on the Impostor Syndrome podcast each month, and alternating between that and the backlog game of the month is what I'm going to be trying to do with the Free Play Fridays. And then for the Saturday afternoon main event, which had been starting at 4 p.m. on Saturdays, I'm moving that up to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Saturday afternoon main event, that is the stream where I'm going to be playing the Impostor Syndrome Podcast game of the month. Then on Sundays, Sundays I had started the Backlog Blitz stream at 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings. I'm moving that to 4 p.m. on Sundays, so 4 p.m. is the Backlog Blitz on Sundays. That's the stream where I'm going to be playing the Backlog Game of the Month. I'm not going to have any streams Sunday mornings because I need Sunday mornings off. Um, I just was watching a YouTube video here today from a guy I follow on YouTube, the Happy Console Gamer. He's a guy. He's a little bit older than me. He's 52, and he's been talking here about recently about gaming and getting older. And kind of like how it's important to get outside, and explore, walk in the woods. I used to be when I was younger. I could hold myself up in my room all weekend and just play video games all weekend and never look away from the screen. As I've gotten older, I realize that's not healthy. I need some outside time. I need some quiet time. I need some time to just chill, be away from everything. So this Sunday was great. I started the new schedule. So I had like I said, the backlog blitz at 4 p.m. And the morning I had off, I kind of chilled, took the dogs for a long walk, meditated. It's great. Spent some time outside because the weather's getting nice. Now, also on Sunday, on a bi-weekly basis, I'm going to be having the bonus round at 7 p.m., which is when I'm going to record my podcasts. So the podcast is bi-weekly. So the main podcast, it's going to be it's basically like the second Sunday of the month. And that is, again, the Impostor Syndrome Podcast, which is the podcast where I cover one of my favorite games of all time each month. And then the other podcast in the bi-weekly monthly podcast rotation is the Best of the Rest, when I'm going to be talking about the games from the backlog I've been playing, the retro games, and also the RPGs. I had planned on doing a movie watch along, and I love movies, and I have a whole list of movies that are thematically related to the games I'm playing each month. But I realized, I've been planning this whole thing for 4 or 5 years, and I realized just the whole legality of streaming movies on Twitch and YouTube. I know people get away with it. I just don't want to take that risk and get my channel banned, especially because movies aren't really the main reason why I started this. Again, it's podcasts. What I might end up doing in the future is maybe we can have it like a book club where I'll suggest some movies at the start of the month that you should watch, and I'll watch them too. And then during the Best of the Rest, I'll talk about my thoughts on those movies. I think I might do that. So, yeah, again, apologies. Again, I always start a new project and get way over ambitious and then realize that it's impossible for one person to do this themselves, which I have a full-time job. So, again, I'm doing this for fun. This is a hobby. If people like and subscribe, that's great. That's not why I'm doing this. So again, I apologize. Like I said, I tend to dream big, but the reality has a way of slapping me in the face a lot of times. I feel like the stream spread out over 5 days is much more manageable for me. And plus, especially on the weekends, it's going to give me so much needed R&R, especially because of the recent health scare. So that is the first Best of the Rest bonus in the books. Again, I hope you join me again. In the future during this journey as I play my favorite games of all time. Plus, sample, as the French say, a veritable buffet of what gaming has to offer. Tune in this month when the Impostor Syndrome Podcast Game of the Month is the Suda51 joint No More Heroes. That's right. That's the 2007 Wii game starring the lovable American otaku Travis Touchdown. I'll be playing the Nintendo Switch re-release with full motion controls. The backlog game of the month is the newly released Romeo is a Dead Man, the latest Grasshopper manufacturer game designed by the auteur genius, Mr. Suda51. I played that this evening on the backlog blitz today, and I am loving it. This could end up being my game of the year so far. For the retro game of the month in March, since Suda loves his legally distinct lightsaber games, I'll be playing 2003's Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy. So look for that coming this Thursday. Again, for the RPG of the month, I'm continuing my adventures in Chrono Trigger. So again, if you want to join me on this journey that statistically is probably not going to last, but I'm going to do my damnedest, man. I'm going to do my damnedest to get through. I'm looking at trying to get through, I'm thinking like 70 games. I want to get like a list of like my top 50 and like top 20 honorable mentions. So again, I've already wasted too much of your time. So until the next podcast, I wish you a good night, good luck, and remember, you got this. See ya.